pride itself has kind of gotten away from us, and with this movement, we kind of have this opportunity to, as a queer community, show our support for the Black Lives Matter movement, and also for the Black Trans Lives Matter movement. Can I hear you say it? Yes. Now let's say Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Yes, and Black Trans Lives Matter. Black Trans Lives Matter.
Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Frederick Douglass spoke these words in 1857, and they have remained true to this day. This is why the promise of incremental change is really performative allyship, yielding little in the way of substance. In the wake of social media bridging the divide in class struggle and inequality, the plight of Black and brown people can no longer be denied. The Black Lives Matter movement parallels the LGBTQ struggle in some very real ways, and allies have joined the fight to ensure real progress here and now. We spoke with a Chicago native, Jerry Wendt, who recalled for us the history of oppression of LGBTQ Americans to discover what history could tell us about the movement today and the similarities in this fight for equal protection and justice. Now at 75 years old, Jerry shares with us his story.
Well, this was before Stonewall. So for the most part, it was very closeted. There was only one real gay organization. It was called Mattachine. Very conservative, very clandestine. The members were not publicly known, and they were very afraid, and they didn't even announce the meetings publicly. So you had to call a number to find out where they were meeting. That's how paranoid things were back then. But as I said, I wasn't really active in the community, so I can't tell what the general climate was for being gay other than it was extremely closeted. The social life was pretty much extant with either what they do, they call cruising, and that's where men would go to rest stops, like on the way to Wisconsin or going west toward Rockford or something. And there were certain places that got reputations through the grapevine, and they would go there for encounters. Other than that, there were the bars, which, as I mentioned, were run by the mafia. I never was a bar person, so I didn't go to the bars. When I finally decided at 30, well, it was 2 years before 30, that I needed to come out, there was this organization called Gay Horizons. And it was a gay organization with a sort of an adjunct with Howard Brown, which was the clinic that catered to gay, lesbian people. There was no AIDS at this point, so it was just, sexually transmitted diseases and stuff like that. And one of the things was it said they had free counseling. And you could just come in, walk in. You didn't have to announce who you were. And so I thought, well, this is for me. I just need to talk to somebody to get a handle on this. So it was on the north side. I got out of work half hour earlier, and I went up to this place. There was one fellow sitting in a desk at front. And so I just sat down on the side and busied myself with a magazine. And he got up and he started putting his things away, that it was time, I guess, for it to close. And he looked at me and he said, "Can I help you?" And the only thing I could think of, because I was so nervous, was, "Yes, I'm gay." And he chuckled and he says, "Oh, one of those." So he says, "Come on, let's go to dinner. We'll get some pizza or something, and you can talk, and I can answer any questions you have and try and make you feel a bit at ease." And I thought this was really a nice fellow. So we did. And we talked on until it got later. And he says, "Maybe you'd like to come home and have a glass of wine with me." Well, I was very much naive. I didn't know about these things. And I said, "Sure." So long story short, went home and we had an assignation. I thought it was the most wonderful time of my life because I had never really had another willing gay partner. And I was just in seventh heaven over this. So I got up and left and went to work the next day. And it was all I could do to contain myself until finally at noon, I had his number and I called it. And he answered the phone and he says, yes. And I said, hi, this is Jerry. And he said, Jerry who? And I said, the fellow that you were with last night? He says, I don't keep track of that. Well, I came to know later that this is what they called a numbers person. He should never have been in that position because his real reason for being there wasn't to counsel people. It was to put another notch in his belt. It was devastating to me. I went back into the closet for 2 more years. I got the Advocate magazine, which at the time was a gay magazine, and it was sent in plain wrapper, so no one knew what you were getting. It had to be like 70, maybe 74. This advertisement that I found in the back of the magazine, they had want ads and meetup ads and all kinds of ads, but this was for gay wine tasting group forming. We need 8 people in order for the group to be viable. If you're interested, please contact me. So I called and left my name on the answering machine. And like a week later, I got a call back from a fellow, and he says, I'm terribly sorry, but we did not generate enough interest to get 8 people, so we're not going to do this. Oh, I was crestfallen. What am I going to do now? But 2 days later, he called back, and he says, wonderful news. We have another person joining, which puts us at 8. Our first meeting will be, and he gave the particulars, lived in Lincoln Park West, right where the Playboy Club was at the time, which is sort of a strange happenstance. I went to this, and I met these other 7 fellows, very upscale fellows. He was a Harvard graduate. He was doing research at the University of Illinois, Chicago, professor, and he had actually been one of the first people that was an enologist at the Martin Ray Vineyards in California. He and Dick Graff, who went on to become very famous for his own vineyard Shalom, they actually vinified what was the old Martin Ray property, making the first vintage under their auspices, which actually was served at the White House, the 1972 Chardonnay and Cabernet. Anyway, we had this meeting. The people like that were wonderful. We had such a diverse crowd, and we agreed that we wanted to meet on a continuing basis. And that group that group gathered for 35 years. We went through until people started dying or went off somewhere or something. That was my coming out. I learned the contacts. I learned the people, and it was Chicago. So I learned about organizational gays, which by that time had picked up. It was a time where after Stonewall, which was 1969, June, there was a big freedom that kind of was pervasive. The gays felt more comfortable, and they started being more out with themselves. And so social gay organizations grew like wildfire. I was then on the board of 2 major gay organizations. The POT, Professionals Over 30, which was an urban group of upscale young men and women who were at least 30 years old, and for the most part were very professional. So you got to see a lot of people who were very much integral in Chicago, in politics and industry and the arts, everything. It ran the gamut. It had an organizational base of about 1,000 people. So I made it to the board of that, and as such, I got to meet many, many interesting people and expanded my base of gay people without ever going to the bars. Now, that isn't to say that I didn't visit them once in a while when after meeting somebody at a pot meeting, we'd say, you want to go have drinks or something? So we'd go to one of these places. So I got to know them, and I got to know the people, because back then it was still a very close-knit community. And it's like people like Tom Tunney, who at that time was a restaurateur, he still is, owned Ann Sather's. Well, Tom got into politics, and he went on to become an alderman of his ward up there. So Tom Tunney is known all over Chicago now. I got to know through pot Jim Flint. Jim Flint started as a silly little man who had a nickname, Rollerina, sort of a drag nickname, because his his gimmick was that he dressed up like a lady and skated around on roller skates. Well, Jim went on to buy and start the Baton, a show club for drag queens, which has become one of the nation's premier drag queens. So people like that were members of POT. Now, living out here, I also found that there was an organization called the FVGA, Fox Valley Gay Association. They were social groups and met in people's homes, had about 400 to 500 members, and they would host parties. Now, alcohol was served, but they had to get insurance, but they got around the other parts of Dram Shop by not serving booze directly, but you bought tickets that were like for a lottery at these gay gatherings. And then at the end, they would pull certain ticket numbers and certain people would win little prizes and stuff. But the real thing was that allowed them to serve alcohol at their parties. Most of them were still, for the most part, closeted, because back then, and even later when the AIDS crisis hit in the 80s, a simple thing like going to get tested for AIDS back then subjected you to being outed, because the doctor had to give the results to the insurance company to pay for the test. And the insurance company would go to your work, who was paying the insurance bill. And when your company found out that you had an AIDS-related condition, whether HIV or full-blown, you were fired. Or, as one friend of mine who was an up-and-coming exec for a car magazine was told, we can't fire you, but you're never going to go any further in this organization. So you might start looking for someone else to go. So one of the things I did through the FVGA was we started an anonymous testing facility. We got a clinician through one of the hospitals that would run the test. And we got it set up in Elgin. And they had a gay organization there, but they had people to volunteer. And 3 days a week, you would go in and get a number. They would then take the blood and run the test. And then you would call in 2 weeks later, give them your number, and they would tell you whether you were negative or positive. So we avoided having being outed. But still, for people with active AIDS out here, it was terrible. First off, from the very top, people like Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan were very homophobic. And they wanted nothing to do with this. They called it the gay plague. Finally, when pressure got so big, he made a grant of $100,000. And by that time, there were 100,000 patients going on. It was a drop in the bucket. So there was nothing there. The religious organizations, some of them were helpful. They allowed gays to establish a gay branch, like the United Church in America had a gay branch. I can't remember what the name of it was then, but they had a gay pastor. On the other side of the coin, the Catholics, which are a big contingent, they wanted to have a gay group, and they started one called Dignity. The Catholic Church let it be known that they could not use any Catholic-owned facility to have their meetings in. So the Catholics eventually ended up meeting at the Methodist Church in Chicago because the Catholics wouldn't allow them to meet in their church. So you went on with that. And then later, when the AIDS epidemic actually came about, out here, hospitals would refuse to treat you. They would just out and out refuse. If you called the paramedics, they wouldn't come. As soon as they found out it was a gay-related disorder like pneumocystis pneumonia, they would not treat you. So we had to establish a carpool, and we would drive our AIDS patients into the only hospital in this entire area, which was then Cook County Hospital. It's now, I believe, Stroger, I don't know. That was the only hospital that would treat. And because so many of us had to go there, the waits were all day, and sometimes you didn't even get seen on the same day. It was just horrific. And it got so bad that every single month I was going to another wake. Originally, through my friends in my wine tasting group and my professional groups and that, we had all decided that eventually we would get a smaller group as we reached retirement, and we would buy a house together, sort of like a dormitory, and we live out our retired lives in our own little cadre. Well, obviously, that never worked out. But in a way, there were little groups that did make their own way. For example, in my wine tasting group, one of our members was a very famous doctor who had a small little cabin that he kept up in Sawyer, Michigan. The reason it was way up there is because when he was first an associate professor, they found that Sawyer was so out of the way and the real estate values were so low, and the community was sort of gay friendly in spite of the fact that it was home to a very conservative religious organization that brought kids out for the summer. Nonetheless, gays found that there were guest houses and rental houses available centered around Sawyer, and they all started staying there. And it became sort of a gay enclave. Well, as these professionals aged and got more income, became upward bound, they bought there. So a lot of times in my gay wine tasting, I also met the group of people that were friends of John from living up there that became friends of mine. And I was invited to events that come up for the weekend in Sawyer, Michigan. And that little gay enclave was another expansion of how gays could get together without hanging out at a bar or just hooking up with numbers. And that's the kind of place where you started finding more and more couples that were out. Of course, they could not adopt. The 1980s went through as a dark period in my life. Real quick, it started with this enclave I talked about before in Michigan. We'd get together at Christmas and we have a progressive dinner. That's where everybody goes to one house and brings that person that serves a course, and then you go to another house and blah, blah, blah. Went to my friend's for the first course, appetizer. So everybody's at his house, and he's such a dork. He went and rented this champagne fountain. There was this silver thing that reached almost the ceiling and took up his whole dining table. And plus, you don't put champagne in a fountain. It goes flat in 15 minutes. Anyway, we're there and we made pâtés. So it just started, and there were maybe like about 45, 50 guys all together having these appetizers before we moved on to the next course. And the phone rings. And it's my friend Craig, who was not married because she couldn't then, but partners with John, who was at the party. Craig was ostensibly not there because he had the, quote, flu, unquote. And he says, I need to talk to John. He was crying. I called John to the phone, and John, I stayed there. And in like 2 minutes, John was in tears. He turns to me and he says, Craig doesn't have the flu. He has AIDS. Party ended. We never went to the rest. Everybody went home with their guests and everything. A year later, John said he wanted to still have a party. Just us, my friend up there who lived there, and his house up there. And here was Craig in the living room putting decorations on the tree, and he had to wear heavy gloves because he had this disease called peticuli, which is an opportunistic infection where the capillaries go to the top where the skin is so thin, if you even touch them, they bleed. So he couldn't get these pine needles touching his skin or he would be in bleed. He'd have to go to the emergency room or something. In February, he died. That was repeated 100 times in the 80s, Gary. And that's what my life was about. And when you were trying to seek solace, nobody wanted to talk to you. You just were part of the gay plague. President of the United States wanted nothing to do with you. They were all in denial. Friends and neighbors didn't want anything to do with you because they would catch it. It was a bad time. And I'm wondering now, is that what blacks are going through? They're just dying.
Can you share your experiences here in Chicago with discrimination and violence against the gay community?
It was commonly known at these mafia-owned bars, they all had 2 o'clock liquor licenses. So everybody knew that they would close down. And they were mostly sent around an area of Chicago. I'm speaking about Chicago now, called Boys Town, which is up on Halsted and Broadway in that area up in the 2000s, 2300 to 2900. And when those bars closed, it became known to the straight crowd, who decided that it would be fun to persecute and harass, but not just verbally, They would wait till the bars were out, and a carload of them would run out and monkey pile on gay guys and beat the holy stuffing out of them. And gay bashing is what they called it. And it was just so prevalent that in Chicago, the gays formed a group called the Pink Angels. And these were mostly guys that had athletic backgrounds. They were fairly large statured guys with muscles and not afraid of any physical contact. And they would patrol on the weekends, Friday, Saturday nights. And when the bars closed at 2, they were out in force. And that alone really went a long ways. New York started that. They had the same thing. I don't think they called them Pink Angels in New York, but they had the same thing. Other cities I don't know about. But yes, just like I've forgotten his name, the fellow in Wyoming, it actually became a sick practice for a straight guy to go to a gay bar and pick up a gay and bring him to a place where these other straight guys were waiting and beat him up or torture him or whatever. It was called queer baiting then. So yeah, it was very much a part of the life. That's why these social organizations like that I was a part of on the boards provided an outlet where we didn't have to worry about that. Because you paid a membership and people knew one another, so you weren't going to get this sort of queer baiting that you would see. Now, the thing about it was we used to, when we were constantly harassed. Sometimes just they thought of the innocence, and the common term that straights used was faggot. Now, faggot actually is an English term, and it means a pile of sticks. But to us, it was a very hurtful expression. And they would call out. Now, I befriended a gal on the train. Pam was her name. And we didn't always get together riding home. So one time I was riding on the dual level upstairs. Pam was downstairs talking to a fellow that was riding with her home. And I'm listening to the conversation, and part of it goes like this. It's like, gay. Oh my God, he's so gay his feet never touch the ground. This one is such a queen that he goes to work with a crown on. She was talking about me. This was a friend that I had trusted. The next morning, waiting for the train, Pam was there. I said, Pam, yesterday I was upstairs when you were talking. She's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any of that. I said, you didn't mean it. Why did you say it? Pam never, I don't know, she took a different train from then. I never saw her on the trains with me. And that's the kind of stuff that you would get. And you would hear even at work, a friend of mine, who's still a friend, would make gay jokes at work. And I would overhear them, and I'd say, Jim, that's totally inappropriate, especially since I was his supervisor. Well, years later now, we're friends. Jimmy is now the manager of the union, the Mason Contractors Association, and he's all over the world with golf outings and that. And he says to me, as a matter of fact, this last year, he says, you know, I was so homophobic that I never thought that I could even talk to a gay person. But you changed my opinion of that. And I thought, you know, this was the same as when I went into VISTA, Domestic Peace Corps, at college years, that I figured if I could change one person that I was working with life so that they became a productive citizen, I consider my job valuable. And to this day, well, not to this day, because I've lost contact now that I've become a senior citizen, but through their forming families and children, and the children having children, I maintain contact with some of those guys that were called corpsmen. I worked in a Job Corps center, and we re-educated and taught industrial work skills to people that came from both urban and rural areas. And there's people like that I stayed in touch with. And I figured, okay, there's a value. But before that, I had worked a lot in civil rights. as a gay person, I know what it was like to be harassed and be the subject of unfair behavior. And so I became active and I marched. I went to CORE meetings when I was in New York. I went to actually black and tan parties, which were quite the thing. They were started off as rent parties, but then they became racial parties. My assignment was in Oregon, which was so lily white, and we brought our corpsmen, who were all kinds of different ethnicities and colors, to town for recreation. And the people would sometimes get very adamant. But I would simply take some of us aside when we were talking, and I'd say, you know, those people that are so hateful are the people that are paying your town, because the money that they're getting through this program for clothing allowances, for entertainment and stuff, is going into your coffers. And you know, the word got around. I didn't see many newspaper articles about those people came to the bowling alley again on Saturday night. We made an impression, but I was under no illusions. My harassment could be ameliorated by hiding if it got too bad. I could go undercover, closeted, we called it then. I could deny gayness, but black people couldn't deny their being. They were out there no matter what. So I couldn't possibly know now the racism, except my guiding credo is Martin Luther King's statement: riot is the voice of the unheard. And when people say to me, yes, but they're destroying stores and raiding merchandise and burning, and I'm like, riot is not a logical, rational act. It's an act of desperation. If some stores get burned and some goods stolen in looting, maybe that's the price we have to pay to come to some understanding that nobody deserves to be racially harassed. It does not belong in society.
How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. And if the social contract is broken, why the fuck do I give a shit about burning the fucking Football Hall of Fame, about burning a fucking Target? You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give a fuck. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, so fuck your Target. Fuck your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this bitch to the ground. And it still wouldn't be enough. And they are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
Well, remember, I was there the first time around. I went through the riots in Chicago, rode home on the trains on the floor because they said snipers were shooting through the windows and they were burning the viaduct bridges and they didn't know if we could get through. So I hope that my racial involvement then would be the answer. That was what, I forget what year that was. Wasn't it 70? Anyway, one of my biggest regrets was that all the work that I did came to naught. We are more racially polarized now as we were then, except it's not as blatant as it was then, although you still see that a lot in the South. Somebody just asked, well, what's the answer? And I said, I don't have one. I gave it my best shot, and it just went for nothing. Nothing. I don't understand it. I can't possibly understand how black people feel because I'm not black. But I do understand what bigoted whites feel like. And to me, it's completely irrational ignorance. I have never lived my life without being aware of the fact that I have to listen. And I'm aware of the fact that my rights stop where yours begin. And that's part of the problem. Now, more police aren't going to solve the problem. Education will take 25 years, and it's still ingrained and it's still going on. And I'm not so sure that religion isn't a part of the problem as well, because you're hearing in these churches, especially in certain sectors, and I'm not going to name them directly here, but they actually still preach separatism and racism. I mean, it's just completely demoralizing and disgusting to me. But you know, I feel helpless. I feel helpless. And if I, as a white, an empowered white, feel helpless, like I say, I can't imagine with black people. And if they're going on with these riots, I can understand why. They have nowhere else to turn. And it's been so many years of, it's going to change, we're going to do this, and nothing happens at all. This is an endemic societal program. Other countries maybe need to be studied where it's not the same. It just, I mean, if you go to Sweden or Finland or they don't have this sort of problem. So I don't know. I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm old now and I'm somewhat cynical because I was there before trying to make a difference and it didn't work. Black gays are still looked down upon. That's why I'm hoping Black Lives Matter in this last series of riots is going to gain traction maybe this time. That's my fervent hope. I don't know. I'm very cynical. I'm afraid it's just going to be another year and it goes back into the same hatred and inbred racism that we're endemic or pandemic in this country.